Today's episode is coming to you from Solana Policy Institute's Washington and Wall Street event in Chicago. We're sitting down with SPI's CEO and founder, Miller Whitehouse-Levine, to tell us all about the event. How's it going so far, Miller?
It's going very well. I feel like there aren't enough crypto events in Chicago because we've had great turnout. There's a lot of energy and it's great to be here. I feel like everything's going very, very well other than the markets, so we'll take it.
The markets, that's right. You had a sit down with a member of Michael Selig's team, chairman of CFTC. How did that go? What was the upshot of that conversation?
Well, I think they're running as quickly as possible to try to get as much done as quickly as possible. They've started, obviously, in the context of crypto with the centralized Perpetuals guidance in May 29th. Obviously, Solana being a public blockchain, we're very eager to see on-chain perpetuals, in addition to other on-chain markets, exist within the regulatory framework. So it's encouraging to hear him saying that that is up next. I obviously think the issues are going to be much trickier in the context of on-chain markets because they operate differently. Mm-hmm. SEC is working through that as we've been talking about for the last 18 months. So I hope they get that out soon and the CFTC follows in their footsteps.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Miller, I know a lot of us were excited when Chair Selig came out at that joint meeting that Eleanor co-moderated or co-hosted with Chair Atkins.
That was awesome.
Yeah. A long time ago, it feels like.
It feels like years ago.
But was that this year?
Yeah. January, but it feels like a long time ago.
And came out and said, we're going to get perpetual futures in the United States. I know a lot of us in the industry were hoping for something maybe more like prescriptive or rules-based, and then we've seen this exemptive relief. Where do you think they're going to go from here? Are we going to get more broad-based rules, or are we still going to be kind of doing one-off centralized perps?
I obviously hope that there's broader relief. I think when I'm thinking about the next 4 years in the space and in DC, our greatest risk is a pendulum swinging in 2029 with the new presidential administration. And so the theme of this Congress at SPI has been durable wins. We want durable wins because guidance, to your point, can be immediately revoked, which would suck. Well, first of all, we need the Clarity Act because there's nothing more durable than statute. But rulemaking is much more durable than guidance documents and one-off relief, like no action letters, because it requires a public comment process to implement them and to undo them. So our hope, of course, is that they are able to do that. Time is short, honestly. Like we're in mid-2026 and the window to get major rulemakings done ends in about 2 years. And then the Congressional Review Act considerations start in the summer of 2028 where Congress can undo rules. So now's the moment to start these rulemaking processes. They take several years and hopefully the commissions both can get them going.
That's a big sort of fear, I think, in the crypto industry is that we get some of these rules, say Clarity doesn't pass, and then, in a couple years' time when the administration changes, they do actually roll back some of these rulemakings. Is that common?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. And, I think in the last 18 months, it's been in our favor as an industry. So, for example, I'm going to get the month wrong, but in Q1 of last year, Congress used the Congressional Review Act through which Congress can overturn rulemakings to overturn the IRS's broker rulemaking, which was going to make all of DeFi brokers and essentially kill it in the US. So
and SAB 121.
Exactly.
Yeah,
yep. SAB 121.
Ellie.
They undid that one. And then even just last week, the SEC initiated a rulemaking on a much older rule from the mid 2000s on Reg 611. So it definitely is possible. Yeah, it's possible.
Yeah, on that note, I know we talk a lot in this industry about policy versus politics. Mm-hmm. And politics seems to continue to impact our ability to get things done. One of the things that's come up in the last couple of weeks has been whether or not the CFTC and other agencies get a full slate of commissioners.
Yep.
And of course, the durability, going back to that point, of a single commissioner ruling is probably less durable than kind of a bipartisan full commission. Do you see that continuing to evolve in these discussions? Obviously, like timing, not necessarily on our side for appointments, but how do you see that continuing to change?
Yeah, I think there's that saying, you ignore politics, politics isn't going to ignore you. I think the only reason, for example, the Clarity Act is on the precipice of enactment, or at least Senate consideration, is politics. So there are advantages and disadvantages to politics, but I do think the industry getting organized on the political front has been totally critical for Congress even spending time on this. So that has downsides. I think the commission question is particularly interesting right now because the Supreme Court is also reviewing the constitutionality of independent commissions broadly. But I certainly think for Democrats in the Senate to support a market structure bill when it's on the floor, they're going to want to have commissioners from their party and a full slate of commissioners at these agencies to start implementing these rules.
Yeah. Can you tell us a bit more? I know our audience maybe isn't as familiar with that Supreme Court case. What are the impacts of that case? What's it about?
Yes, impacts are unclear, but there is a case from, I think, over 100 years ago now called Humphrey's Executor. And that said, where you have these independent agencies, which are kind of a unique thing. Like the Treasury Secretary is appointed by the president and he can fire him at any time. Same with many cabinet positions. In the 20s, we created these independent agencies, which are supposed to be somewhat removed from the executive's political process. And the case right now is essentially asking whether the president has the constitutional authority to fire commissioners at these independent agencies at will. And the real question is whether these independent agencies, which are creatures of statute, can exist in the executive branch, but outside of presidential oversight to a certain extent. And it's been playing out for a decade plus with the CFPB, which is a relatively more recent creation that doesn't have a 5-member commission. So it's a very interesting constitutional question whether these agencies, if they don't report to the president, what political process do they report to? I suppose is the argument of the folks that want to see Humphrey's Executor overturned. What the implications are, I don't know, because I think we're going to have to see what happens and then figure out what the implications are from there, because no one alive has been in a world where independent agencies aren't protected like they are today.
Let's talk a little bit about clarity, because where are we today? June 16th when we're recording this, and we've heard some timelines thrown out there, some deadlines. What are you expecting to see when it comes to passage and the conversations that you're having with lawmakers and industry peers? Where are we going to get this Clarity Act passed?
Well, I think in an ideal world, July 4th would be would be the hard deadline. But I think.
But we can talk about why that's
Eleanor
not.
has some opinions.
We
on
can
it.
talk about why that's not likely. Right?
It's certainly aspirational. Congress needs a deadline to do anything, so we got to have some sort of deadline.
Right.
My expectation is, to the extent all of this can come together, we're looking at floor consideration in late July and early August, so the last 2 weeks of session before going into August recess. I think that's a fine timeline. I think it's the last opportunity really to get it done in the Senate, so I think it's absolutely critical it passes the Senate by August 7th, or I think the odds of its enactment this Congress drop precipitously. Mm-hmm. I think this has been now debated. This specific bill has been debated for 18 months now. Like I am becoming increasingly frustrated with arguments that we need more time and we haven't had enough time. I think anyone outside of Washington would say you've got 18 months going here. Like let's get her done, so to speak. So I think that's a realistic timeline, and I think it's the last opportunity to get it done, frankly, this Congress, which means, in my view, this decade. So now's the moment. We need it.
Yeah. Do you see a potential for? I think when you're probably right in saying that the hard deadline for passage of the Senate before August recess, if it passes the Senate before August recess, could it potentially, in your view, pass the House in a lame duck session? I think Ruben Gallego said something along those lines recently to Punchbowl in the last couple of days that we could get this done in the lame duck after the midterms pass. There's some optimistic among Democrats that could get done. Do you see that as a possibility?
I don't think we should be treating it as a possibility. Lame ducks are just a total roulette wheel. Depending on how elections go, they can either be extremely productive or absolutely nothing could happen. Like I said, I think this thing is well baked. It's gone through both committees in the Senate. The House has already passed it. And I think certainly the Senate needs to consider it before August 7th. Whether that punts it beyond the election in the House, I don't think so, because I think there should be some floor time in September or October. in the House to pass it. So I hope it's all said and done for all of our sakes prior to the election.
How do you, in dealing with the Hill and like the various constituencies that we have to engage with as an industry, deal with like more optimistic timelines from certain counterparties and then maybe more pessimistic? Like, how do you kind of cut through the noise to get to like a real, obviously we have very pragmatic, like this is the amount of time it will take, but how do you decide kind of where to, I guess, like place your hope in terms of what timeline we're actually kind of dealing with?
Well, I think on this one, it's a bit easier because I do think it's just kind of over if it doesn't happen by August 7th in the Senate. So I think that's like a hard deadline realistically. I think it's easy to, in DC often, and I think this has been less on the clarity side, but more on the SEC rulemaking side. All of these commissioners, many of these members are talking to the press all day, giving speeches all day. They're saying a lot. If you listen to what people say, you can cut through a lot of the noise that you see on Twitter or rumor mongering in trad media. So I think checking the primary sources is a fruitful activity because, to your point, on Twitter, there's a vast range of inaccurate or just completely imaginary takes on all of this.
BRCA and ethics are still not done. Those are two of the biggest sticking points left before the bill can be brought to the Senate floor. How are you feeling about where BRCA stands in the eyes of law enforcement? There's been some meetings at the White House. I think there may be another meeting this week. What's sort of the overall takeaway for you? I know you're very engaged in this.
Yes, the BRCA, the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act, most important provision in the bill. It essentially, I think, broadly the bill when it comes to DeFi developers and on-chain developers, it creates a bright line between those who are centralized and decentralized. It says if you're centralized or decentralized in name only, you're going to have regulatory obligations. Sounds good. Like that should be in the bill. That clear line needs to be respected by both industry and builders in the future, as well as law enforcement agencies and federal agencies. I think the way I think about it is the only people that don't want clear lines between those two groups are the folks that want to operate outside of them. And that's just as applicable to industry. You're trying to say you're decentralized if you're not. And it also applies to law enforcement. If law enforcement, sees under the bill that you don't have regulatory obligations, they shouldn't be able to criminally indict you for not meeting those regulatory obligations. So that's what the BRCA does, and it has been weaponized by DOJ in the past. So it is a real problem. Not just the public cases, but there were tons of non-public investigations. And again, it's criminal. So you're not talking about an SEC enforcement action. You're talking about going to jail. It's the only thing developers actually ask me about in the Clarity Act, the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act, like on a daily basis, because it's the risk that informs their decision-making on a daily basis. So if we're clarifying who doesn't have and who does have regulatory obligations, industry needs to respect that under statute, and so does law enforcement. That's why I think the BRCA has to stay in the bill. To your point, I do think there's been a lot of progress on that front over the last several weeks. I think the law enforcement groups have discovered many aspects of the bill that they were not previously aware of, like all of Title III, which grants them many new authorities to get after the activity they're worried about. So I think we'll get there. The provision that addressed Chairman Grassley's concerns before markup, I think, did a lot for the law enforcement groups as well. So I think it's a matter of just making sure people understand that with these protections also comes the clear obligations for folks outside of that space.
Can we get in the weeds a little bit on that? Because I know something that's come up in the last couple of weeks has been that 1960 is usually enforcement under that statute is usually almost like a tack-on charge. It's usually not the primary. Like essentially, you'll get charged before the previous administration with 32 counts, and then you plead out to maybe 20 of them, or whatever. How does BRCA impact the ability of law enforcement to either continue to do that, or how is it maybe like misused or used in novel ways under the previous administration?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think to charge 1960, you have to be able to charge something else in a way, like 1956, the traditional money laundering statute. So it's really just a gratuitous add-on in many of these cases. I think the deal that was struck leading into markup allows law enforcement to still go after people with 1960 if they have the specific intent to create something for illicit purposes. Sounds good to me. If you're specifically intending to do crime, then throw the book at them, so to speak. And if you can't charge somebody as a money transmitter and the money laundering, charge them with money laundering. So I think prosecutors have never failed to find some statute to charge someone with when they want to charge someone with something. So I'm not worried about the prosecutors.
Is there any room for changes to the BRCA language?
I think so. I think that to the extent, for example, we could clarify the rule of construction to address potential concerns around specific intent or knowingly trying to do something illicit, completely open to that. What I would not personally be in favor of or recommending Congress consider is fundamental changes to what it's trying to do or the group of persons that it protects. For example, Senator Cortez Masto at the markup had an amendment that redefined what a non-controlling developer or provider, so the folks protected by this section, how they're defined, and her amendment would make it a null set. So it would have a lot of words that didn't capture anyone and wouldn't do anything. So I'm certainly not open to that because it would moot the entire point of the section. I think it is a matter of fundamental fairness under the law, where if you don't, from the agencies here that you have obligations, the DOJ can't come in and criminally charge you for not meeting those non-existent obligations. I think it'll be difficult to walk away from that core logic because it's, I think, fundamental to the rule of law to respect those kinds of boundaries.
Right. Do you think that the support of senators like Catherine Cortez Masto and Mark Warner are really contingent on the support from the law enforcement, or do you think they've already made up their mind where they're going to vote?
I don't know. I don't know. I think they may have developed their own views at this point, but I certainly hope we can earn their support on this bill, and are certainly trying to.
What do you think? Let's talk about ethics. Where do you think we are in terms of getting to something that's palatable both for Congress and for the administration at this point?
That is an excellent question.
That's the $1 million question.
I have no idea where we are. It seems like things are happening, which is an encouraging sign to me. I was worried that, for the last 12 months, we've been talking about the need for some sort of ethics package and that those discussions would never even start. So I think it's encouraging that, papers being passed and they're, in the substance enough to be upset, for example, last week about whatever happened in last week's meeting. But I mean, my view on that is it's well outside of our area of expertise. It's above the industry's pay grade to a large extent. So I hope the Senate and the White House can work something out, because I think the Democrats in the Senate have been quite clear forever that their support of anything would be predicated on this. So I think it's something that has to be worked out. I definitely think if all said and done, if all these other issues are worked out, the fatigue, the man hours, DC is pot committed, I hope, to this bill at this point, just because I cannot tell you the tens of thousands of man hours that have gone into this bill over the last 18 months, especially on the Senate side. I don't think the Senate wants to do this again. I think everyone's ready to get crypto over the finish line so we can stop thinking about it.
Yeah, crypto hell, as Mark Warner
Exactly.
Right?
But I think that's working in our favor right now.
Yes.
The fatigue can encourage deal making and getting things done.
Yeah.
Hey, Crypto in America listeners. The crypto companies leading this industry aren't waiting for regulation to catch up. They're building on infrastructure that's already there. SumSub is the verification platform powering 8 of the world's 10 biggest crypto exchanges. Global coverage, 1,400 plus supported documents, full travel rule compliance across 2,100 VASPs, and AI-powered fraud detection that acts before threats hit the blockchain. But it doesn't just keep you compliant, it helps you convert. With a seamless UX, reusable KYC, and tools like SumSub ID, you onboard more users faster and keep them moving. And with a no-code platform, you stay compliant from day one, no matter how regulations change. Download SumSub's State of Crypto 2026 report in the description below to get a clear read on today's crypto landscape and the practical moves teams are using to stay ahead.
We also have the midterms coming up, so
Yep.
you've got that sort of like side quest happening
Yep.
at the same time because you've got political spending going on.
Oh yeah.
You yourself are on the board of the DD PAC.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about that. I know we had Gavin on recently
Oh,
on
good.
Crypto America to talk about it. He's the founder of the Developers PAC, which basically was rolled out to encourage members of Congress to support software developers.
Yeah.
Tell us
I
about
mean,
it.
I think we are in a brave new era of the law and software development, and crypto is just the start of it.
Yeah.
If you think about what AI, Congress and Washington has no idea what's coming for them on these fundamental software developer questions, and they're going to be coming quick. Last Friday was a good example of that, with the export authorities used to prevent people from accessing Fable. That is the same authority that led to the original cases in the early 2000s that found code to be speech. So we're already getting to the heart of what is code, what is coding, is it a constitutionally protected activity? And crypto didn't get us there. AI got us there in a few months. So I think developers are going to have to be quite active in Washington over the next several decades. And many of these issues around developer liability, are they liable for third-party use of their software, are just as applicable in the context of crypto as they are in AI. And while this PAC is crypto developer focused at the moment, these are the fights that are going to, I think, define how the U.S. builds in cyberspace over the next 100 years. Mm-hmm. So Gavin, thank you for having him on. It was his first podcast appearance. He was very excited. Gavin, I think, recognized a need for those builders to have a dedicated voice in DC. I think the fight or discussion around the BRCA has been ample evidence of that need. And so
It was actually, someone said to me, they were surprised that something like this hadn't been done before now.
I completely agree. It's well overdue. We should have done it 5 years ago, but it's not too late. And like I said, I think we're on a multi-decade journey here.
Yeah, I want to ask about that sort of core principle, like software developers, for some reason in crypto are not viewed the same way as like AI or even social media. I think Patrick Witt on the show last week talked about David Sachs bringing up in the meeting with law enforcement that one of the reasons the US kind of dominated the last 2 decades of the internet was some of the concessions that were made back in the early 2000s. You mentioned AI seems to be getting there very quickly. Why do you think Congress doesn't treat developers in this industry the same as other software developers?
It's a good question. I think in my mind, the thing that makes it feel different to people is that financial transactions are involved, and obviously the exchange of assets has been regulated, to hell and back for the last 100 years, and that's not been the same with communications. But you're absolutely right. I think if internet website providers had third-party liability for what people were doing on their websites, the internet would not exist. I think Europe has already been a cautionary tale of overregulation and liability of developers. They passed the AI Act in I think 2022, and I think they've already lost the AI race and will be completely dependent on U.S. companies to access these technologies. And we already saw that. I think a couple of weeks ago, Germany, a sovereign nation state, was asking the U.S. government to give them access to Mythos so that they could review critical infrastructure. So I think it's important, to your point, to keep in mind that these technologies can become the fundamental sources of our national power, of our economic might. And to the extent we lose that, especially in the context of AI, you can't catch up. So I think it's you got to strike a balance, or you end up relying on people who are building the most advanced models or the most important crypto projects, and asking other governments to help you out. I don't think that's the position the U.S. intends to be in.
Would you say there's an education gap as well, perhaps for members of Congress who look at crypto as sort of a monolith as well? There's bad actors, but there's a lot of different kinds of people who build crypto technology. There's the founders, there's the developers, there's there's all kinds of people who built this technology. But I think that is something that DDPAC especially has been kind of set out, its mission was to also educate members of Congress around what developers actually do.
Exactly. Yeah. No, like I think in DC, there's been a lot of representation of centralized exchanges, of investors, and everybody kind of forgets about, okay, what are they investing in?
Mm-hmm.
What are the exchanges listing? Who are creating those things that they're investing in and listing? Oh, it's like the developers. So like nothing exists in cyberspace without them. And so I think I'm excited for this pact to get spun up and hope it can have an impact.
Yeah.
I want to ask a little bit about how this impacts Solana directly, because obviously we haven't talked about the Howey test in a long time.
No.
And
it's still very much part of
it's still a thing.
The new guidance that they're building around.
Yeah. So we started out talking about rulemaking. We've seen the SEC, CFTC joint guidance. We've seen things like GLS introduced. Solana seems to be very firmly in that like commodity space, and maybe that's a good level of certainty going forward. But what do you think happens if we don't get clarity done, and folks like Solana in the industry are kind of dealing with like the status quo that we have right now? And that even applies to like Genius and stable coins. Like if clarity doesn't pass, how do you sort of navigate the world in the next few years?
I think we'll have high urgency to get as much rulemaking as we can get done, but realistically, I think the risk of another Biden administration approach to the industry is fatal for like the industry in the US. I think we didn't know as an industry what we were getting into from 2021 to 2025. And I think a lot of investment, a lot of people choosing to build in crypto in 2021 and 2022 wouldn't have decided to do that if they knew they had 4 years of regulation by enforcement, regulation by indictment ahead of them. I think that awareness or fear is much stronger now, having gone through the Gensler era. So I think to the extent, without statutory clarity, we see a hostile administration come into power, my expectation or my fear is that the industry in the US will kind of wither because people won't opt in to another hostile 4 years.
I'm going to ask you about the Roman Storm case. I think we have seen the latest was that the government plans to have a retrial in October. Something that happened recently was that President Trump nominated Jay Clayton to become the next director of national intelligence. So he's no longer going to be at the Southern District of New York. In your view, does that change anything potentially for Roman Storm? I know that the guy coming in is known to the crypto industry. I'm not sure if he's pro-crypto or, Jay Clayton was head of the SEC, may or may not have been pro-crypto at one point. But in your view, does this change any of the dynamics happening in Roman Storm's case while everything is going on with clarity at the moment?
Too soon to tell. I certainly hope it will, because I think they should drop the. Well, I suppose he was convicted on 1960, unfortunately, and they're recharging on the other two counts. But yeah, no, I hope that Mr. James McDonald, who's the president's appointee, takes a fresh look at the case. I don't know if he will or what his views on it will be, but I think it became clear what Jay Clayton's views were. He didn't agree with us, and so a fresh face there, I think, provides some hope.
I do think the industry had some confidence in that pick to replace Jay Clayton. It seems like it could be a positive step. I want to, again, not to go to this, like, very optimistic. We're going to get clarity. Everything will be rosy. If we do have to kind of do this again, obviously one of the things that could happen in the midterms is committee leadership flipping, and there's some very interesting folks who would fill those seats. Do you think that, given the amount of contributions, fundraising, engagement, the industry has shown that there's a path to re-engage, probably looking in something like very different, but a path to re-engage if we do see the House and the Senate, potentially just the House, flip in November?
Yeah, I think yes and no. I think the market, so to speak, or the industry that doesn't follow the legislative process as closely, it thinks the bill's an inevitability. So I think it not happening will be a massive blow to confidence and interest in the space at this point, honestly. I think that's overblown. Like, crypto has survived and will survive and be fine. But I do think there will be reassessments of Washington engagement, how people are thinking about the utility of doing that, whether it makes sense to do on a long-term basis. So yeah, I don't know what the implications will be, but I do think it'll be well, if it does happen or if it doesn't happen, it will be a major inflection point in how the industry has approached DC, in my opinion.
As we wrap up, Miller, what can we expect to see priority-wise from Solana Policy Institute as, clarity, obviously, but beyond clarity? I know we have some tax initiatives going on in the House Ways and Means Committee. Anything there or beyond that?
Yes, on the tax side, Ways and Means had a hearing, I think last week. It might have been 2 weeks ago. Time is flying. They have a tax package. Taxes, never really my thing, but it is important for anyone to use any of these things. De minimis being the big one. Right now, when you pay a 0.5 cent gas fee on Solana, you owe a gain or loss on that 0.5 cent transaction fee and have to report it to the IRS. That's happening millions of times a day on the chain and is not a viable tax strategy. So de minimis is definitely a big one. The type, in the bill, there's a $10 de minimis. Sounds good, and encourage you to see that in there. And then staking tax is also a big one. The issue right now is people get newly created tokens and are taxed at receipt, which forces selling and doesn't make sense because it's newly created property. Tax them as income when they sell it, which is also in the bill. So that's good to see. Unfortunately, it wasn't bipartisan, and so we'll have to figure out something to get the Dems and Representative Horsford comfortable. So work will continue there. Ways and Means, the industry didn't have much capacity to be talking to them before 2025. So they're, I think, getting up to speed, and it's been a lot of work this year. I think beyond that, the innovation exemption at the SEC has been languishing over there for a while, and I think it's time for them to get that out. Great cryptos at the White House, and it's time to get that out. So I think a lot of people are waiting to see what happens with clarity before moving forward on rulemakings. But yeah, I think getting to the extent the bill doesn't pass, getting as many rulemakings done as quickly as possible and preparing for a potentially defensive strategy in the next admin is what we'll be thinking about.
And then really last question, we didn't ask you in the beginning, what does crypto in America mean to you?
What does crypto in America mean to you? My favorite podcast.
Good answer. Miller, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Miller.